tonight is the last class in this series of dealing with Bible evidences. The goal of this class will be a lot of kind of summary and to put all the pieces together, hopefully, because we've covered a lot of information on a lot of different topics, and so at the end of the day, you want to make sure, hey, how do all the pieces fit together, and what was the whole point of it too? Because as much as I enjoy looking at evidences for God in the scientific realm, of which there are so many and more every day, in fact, you could just make that a full-time occupation, and there are those who do. At the end of the day, the goal is not just to look at the science just for the interest, but to make us better equipped to reason with the lost, to talk to people so that we can get them to see the big picture. And so the analogy that's used in the book is the box top from a puzzle. You get all these different pieces that are rattling around, and if you dump all the jigsaw puzzle pieces out on the table, you could guess forever at what those things mean. But what the rest of us do, maybe there's some crazy puzzlers here who take the box away and try and do it without that. What most of us do is we grab the box. We go, okay, this is what it's supposed to be. This is how all of these pieces fit together. That's kind of the goal of this class, is to help put those pieces together so that when we have conversations with those who do not believe in God or do not believe in the Bible, we can help them to see, well, wait a second, you see this piece of evidence out here, you see this idea over here, what if we start connecting those together? What's the big picture of it? So, with that in mind, kind of as we wrap up, some of the main ideas and questions that we want to help people to answer are these ones that are very human. The first one is the origin of humanity. Where did we come from? Why is that question important, by the way? Foundation. Foundation to what? Yeah, where it all began. So where do we come from? Depending on your answer to that, it changes everything that expands from it. So you think of it like the trajectory of a rocket, right? You aim a rocket, and 1 degree of change when you're shooting for the moon makes a big difference, right? So where we came from makes a huge difference. What is the hypothesis or the explanation of our origins if there is no God? What's the standard explanation? Yeah, we came from monkeys, right? We came from this process of, sometimes I refer to as the goo to you process, right? We start out from non-life and we go to life, and then that life gets more and more complex slowly over time. And those origins, every time that, according to evolution, every time that life gets more complex, right? You move from fish to bipeds or quadrupeds and move on up the chain. You get that origin of species picture that is often on the cover, from lower level to more complex. Every time that species change from one to another, how does it happen? Does it happen through design? How do we get from one thing to another, according to evolution? What? Morph. Yeah, they evolve, they morph, and the morph happens accidentally. That's one of the major components to evolutionary theory. And Dawkins, who's probably the preeminent atheist today, he wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker. The idea is that all these things that to us seem like design and they seem like they have purpose, in reality, they're accidental. So if your origin is just a giant accident, does that change your worldview? Fundamentally, doesn't it? I mean, if I'm just here as an accident and you're just here as an accident, how you live should have, we don't have a conversation about purpose anymore. We can't. So origin is a huge question for life. The other one is identity. Who are we? And of course, these are all connected, right? My identity is often associated with my origin. But if you go to the book of Genesis, who we are in the creation story, what makes the difference between human beings and every other living creature? If you go back to Genesis 1, what was the difference? God's image, right? That's the biblical explanation, right? Your identity is you are made in the image of God. So you were created by Him, you're created to be like Him, you're created to be His children. That is your identity. According to evolutionary theory, if there is no God, what is your identity? Who are you? You're a cosmic accident, right? And they would put it this way, they'd say, you're a beautiful cosmic accident. Bill Nye, the science guy, who was really known pretty well for all of his kids' science stuff, and now is a very outspoken atheist and humanist. That's the way he'll put it. He says, it's all an accident, but it's the most amazing and beautiful accident. Still an accident. So what's your identity? What? Well, yeah, exactly. There's a problem, right? We have this struggle that there's, like, why do we even care if it's beautiful? Right? The whole idea that we care about right and wrong and good and evil and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't make any sense with accidental things. The moral structure for atheism, and don't mistake me, when you run into atheists, they will have a sense of morality. The average person who professes to be an atheist does not say, oh, there's no such thing as evil or bad. But the whole structure for that philosophy of whatever they're going to say is right and wrong is built on sand. It reminds me of the parable that Jesus told. There are two guys who built a house, right? One guy built it on the sand, the other guy dug down deep and had a foundation for it. If there is no God, there is no foundation for morality. So our identity is in question. Meaning matters, right? So this is not only who we are, but why we're here, which origin talks about the past, where you came from. Identity talks about who you are right now. And meaning, the idea of purpose, is really the question of the future. Like, where am I going? What am I doing here? From our standpoint, is it hard for us as Christians to articulate what our meaning is to life? Like, if somebody said, what's the meaning of life? Could you as a Christian in a sentence or two describe what the meaning of life is? So Phil says yes. So Phil, what would you say? Okay, fear God and keep His commandments. So you can articulate purpose and meaning, right? Because you're not a cosmic accident. You know who you are, you know where you came from, and you know where you're going. You can't have that conversation intelligibly without that foundation. Morality, which Josh already brought up, how do I live? Right? So you can think of it like this. Origin is where did I come from? That's the past. Identity is who I am. That's the present. Meaning is the future. Where am I going? And morality is how do I get there? Okay? How do I get from here to where I'm supposed to be? How do I get from where I am right now to the end result of life that I want? All of those things just fall apart without the box top, without God. And with all of the more complex arguments that we have used and talked about in this class, I think it's worth backing up a second and saying that it's good to have all of those arguments in your quiver, right? Have those arrows. Well, we'll talk again and kind of refresh on things like anthropic constants and stuff like that. But most of the time when you're talking to the average person, even the average person who doesn't believe in God, the best place to start are these questions. And don't feel like you have to answer it to start with. I might add that too. We always feel like we have to be on the defensive as Christians, but you don't have to. If somebody else believes something different than you, they have to be able to articulate why they believe what they do as much as you have to articulate why you believe what you do, right? You both have to prove your argument. Feel free to ask somebody you're talking with all of these questions. Why are we here? How should we live? You ask an atheist that, and the best that they're going to give for the purpose of meaning is evolution says the meaning of life is what? Anybody happen to know what evolution says the meaning of life is? The perpetuation of the species. That's the meaning of life from an evolutionary standpoint. You just want to perpetuate the species. In other words, I want to get my DNA down the pike so it keeps going. And then, if that's the meaning of life, what's morality? If my only goal, my purpose in life is to perpetuate the species, and in particular, not just generically the species, but me and my DNA, survival of the fittest, and I want to be the fittest, right? So what's moral then? Yeah, whatever will help me get that done, right? The idea that we evolved and it's survival of the fittest, and I need to do what it takes to perpetuate my DNA, which is superior. And you know why my DNA is superior? Because it's mine. That's right. That's the right answer. It's because it's mine, right? My DNA is superior to yours because it's mine. And you would say the same thing. Your DNA is superior because it's yours. If evolution is true, that thought process that the superior DNA should do whatever it takes to perpetuate its existence is exactly how you got the Holocaust. That's exactly how you got Mein Kampf from Adolf Hitler. It's exactly how you get genocide. Do you see the logic? Why not? And so these are real life examples of what happens when we remove God from the picture. Anybody have any comments or questions? Devil's advocate on any of that? I like that too. Yeah, absolutely. Judges is the grand experiment of the Old Testament, right? What happens when you remove God's laws? You just let everybody kind of free for all go for it, and we see the atrocities that exist when every man does what is right in his own eyes. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. And then the last one is destiny. Where are we going? That is, what's the end result? This one is very closely tied to meaning, because meaning is about purpose, which is thinking ahead. Destiny is about fulfilling that purpose. For a Christian, what's the destiny you're shooting for in one word? Heaven, right? Real simple. What I love about the Bible is when you start to ask these deep philosophical questions, right? Every one of those questions is a deep philosophical question. The Bible makes all of them easy. It takes something that the world makes deeply complicated. I mean, you take any one of those 5 questions, how many books could you find in a library on any one of those 5 questions? Or philosophers that have dedicated their life to any one of those 5 questions? And then you go to the Bible, how quickly can you answer all of them? Right? It's the instruction manual. If there were a God and he wanted you to understand life, you'd think he would make it easy. Turns out he did. It's beautiful. So all of these, and the 5th one, by the way, is also one of the dark difficulties of atheism. Because what's the destiny if you believe there is no God? Yeah, you die, and then what happens? That's it. Game over, right? Done. You have nothing to look forward to, no hope, no nothing. And so, now atheists will tell you, well, yeah, I mean, that's true, but if it's the truth, but then they'll try and give you some way. It's interesting. They've done interviews with some major atheists along the way, and ultimately, a lot of times they end up falling back to trying to find eternity in other ways. Like Dawkins will say things like, I know when I die, it's all gone, but I write my books so that after I'm long gone, people will know these truths. That's just a guy searching for eternity without God. And I might add, how many times do people do that? They're trying to continue their existence in some other way. If I amass enough wealth, then I can build, I could be a Rockefeller and I can build a bunch of stuff that has my name on it. If I have enough children, I continue the family lineage. All of these things are just, they're human ways of trying to fill the God-sized hole in our heart that God says ultimately there's only one way to do it, and it's me. But it's interesting with destiny that atheists will say, well, when you die, nothing happens. I mean, you're gone. But then they'll go back to talking about how they try and live in such a way that after they're gone, they still live on, which is just a joke, right? Because why do I care how many people read my books if when I'm dead, I'm just gone? What's the benefit to me at that point? It's an interesting, they get stuck in this cycle of wanting to have meaning and purpose, but their philosophy doesn't allow for that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Oh, I agree. Yes, we are by design worshipful creatures. I think that's very true. It's interesting, when Jesus spoke, he said that no man can have two masters. He'll either hate the one and love the other. He never gave the option of a man having no masters. Like, that's not on the table. You notice that? Even if, like, one of my favorite ones is the Babylonians who said, we have no master. Like, we are strong, we'll do what we want. That was even what Habakkuk says, is that they are vicious and brutal and they do what they want. And then in the end, in Habakkuk it says, their God is their strength. So they just ended up worshiping themselves and their own strength. Which doesn't work out very well, because whether you're a nation or an individual, what happens to your strength eventually? It fades, right? It's just the nature of it. As human beings, we see that the outer man decays. As nations, no nation exists in perpetuity. And they talk about the golden era of Rome, the golden era of Babylon. They'll talk about the golden era of America someday. But that also implies that there's a golden era, there's a silver, bronze, and dust, right? So, yeah, I agree. Very much so, we're meant to be worshipful. I don't think we had the option of not worshiping something. Yeah. Okay. John 3:18. We're very familiar with John 3:16, but I want you to take a moment and park yourself 2 verses further with me. John 3:18. He who believes in him is not judged. He who does not believe has been judged already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. What John 3:18 says is that ignorance is not an excuse. That's what it says. If you do not believe in God, if you just say, I never knew any better, is he going to accept that on the judgment day? He who does not believe has been judged already. One of the things that we confuse is, and you'll hear it when people say, so you're saying that anybody who doesn't believe in Jesus or follow Jesus is going to hell. And they phrase it in a way to make it sound like God is sending all those people to hell because they didn't believe in Jesus. That's the wrong way to think of it. If Jesus never walked this earth, or if, as we talk about, when Jesus said, he said he could call for all those angels and not go through with it, and that was an option. Let's say Jesus did. Let's take a hypothetical. So Jesus does decide, you know what, change my mind. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to sacrifice myself on the cross. So he calls the angels, they come and they take him away. So there is no crucifixion, there is no resurrection, none of those things. Where do we all go? We all go to hell. It's not like Jesus coming and dying on the cross sent us to hell. That's where we're going otherwise. And what's the reason for that, by the way? Sin. Right? So all have sinned and all are counted as dead because of that sin. Romans 6:23. So what we have to remember is that when we're talking with people, there isn't the option of ignorance being bliss. Now that's the old saying, right? Ignorance is bliss. So I don't know about it, it's not a problem. I sold vacuums for a little while. That's actually one of my deep dark secrets I just told you. And I did door-to-door sales of vacuums, and was not good at it. But I went to a lady's house one time, and you're supposed to show all the dust and everything, and so you kind of scrape up the carpet and everything, and all the little dust motes, they all float into the air. And I was just trying to show her how dirty her carpet was so that she would want to buy this product. And she goes, that's not a problem. I just close the windows. I just close the blinds, and that's not a problem. The dust doesn't go away when you close the blinds, right? You just can't see it anymore. What a lot of times people are doing is they're closing the blinds, closing the curtains so that they don't see the problem. But does the problem go away if you don't see it? That's what John 3:18 says. And the reason I bring it up is because we are living more and more in a culture where people are either literal atheists, meaning they've come to the conclusion evolution is true, that there is no God, it's all a giant cosmic accident, and they've decided that. And that's still a very small percentage. And I suspect it will stay a small percentage. It'll probably get bigger than what it is right now, but it's probably not going to ever be the majority view. But there's another group of people that are the practical atheists. And what they're doing is they're saying, I know that there's some people who believe there's a God, and I know there's people who believe that there isn't a God, and I'm just really not going to deal with it. And so I'm just going to go through my life and do what I think is best and live for myself. That percentage of people is a much larger percentage. Can we agree to that idea, that concept? The practical atheist is a much larger bandwidth. They are not aware of John 3:18. Ignoring the problem doesn't make it not a problem. But you and I are not unaware of John 3:18. Right? We know that just because they don't see the dust doesn't mean it's not there. And that's where we come in. The only reason that you and I are still here, to go back to the 2 Peter class that we just finished on Sundays, why did God, and why does God continue to wait to bring the judgment day and destroy the world? What's he waiting for? He doesn't want anybody to perish. That's not for us. If God came today, what would happen to you? You'd be fine, right? Gwen's like, I'd be happy. That's right. Gwen takes 2 Peter 3 serious, looking for and hastening the day. She's like, bring it, right? For us, we're good. And I might add to that, and I'm going to tangent here for just half a second. That's the way we are taught to think as Christians. God wants you to have confidence. When Paul near death, did he say, I might have a crown laid up for me in heaven? So there is, right? And he also said, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. So if Paul felt comfortable to say, there is a crown of life laid up for me in heaven, and have that confidence, we're supposed to have that too. And if you don't have that confidence, there's one of two reasons. Either you're not believing the promises enough, or you have something in your life that you know that you have not been living as you ought to, and either one of them you're going to have to deal with, right? We got to address it one way or the other. But for us, we should have confidence. We should be like, great, if the judgment day comes, I'm fine. But it hasn't come because there's a bunch of people out there with the John 3:18 problem. And we're the only Bible that most of them will ever get. Okay, lecture over. Yes. Yes. Yeah, so, he who believes in his, Mark 16:16, he who believes and is baptized shall be saved, and he who disbelieved shall be condemned. Yeah, so what that is referring to is the fact that on the judgment day, right, you're gonna get an up or a down vote. That's an oversimplification of it, but you're going to either be condemned as lost, or you are going to be welcomed in. And so I guess maybe could you clarify your question in that? Because I'm afraid I'm not quite answering it. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You're condemned. Yeah. He who does not believe has been judged already. That's the condemnation. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think you're right. And I think the scriptures bear that out. You take the very first gospel sermon preached in Acts 2, it didn't begin with the good news bit. It began with, Jesus is the Christ and you killed him. And when they were cut to the heart, then we could move to repent and be baptized, and the gift of salvation and remission of sins is yours, right? But I think you're right. That is the problem. And the difficult bit is getting people at times to understand how big of a deal it is to not be right with God. And that can be described a lot of different ways. One way that I like to handle it, and I think I might have said this in this class, and if so, you get it twice. But heaven's perfect, right? And so if something is perfect, if you add anything beyond, it's not perfect anymore. And so heaven's perfect where everybody's good and everything's righteous and everything's wonderful and nobody has to lock their doors at night and there's nobody lies, there's no deceit, there's everything perfect in every way. So what happens if you let an imperfect person into a perfect place? It makes it imperfect. Now, that's not the perfect way to describe it. But it helps me to kind of understand, oh, right, I'm tainting it. Right? If my sins aren't washed away and God lets me into heaven, it's not heaven anymore. And that problem that I have, that I'm too dirty to walk through the gates, is the part that we have to figure out first. I think all of us, and then consequently share with people so that they can understand too. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. It is. It's a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of how great the grace of God is, which happens for all of us, and I certainly struggle with that myself. But yes, so there's kind of layers of conversation that have to happen. But yeah, one of the aspects of if there is a God, then I am morally obligated to him. Right? If there is no God, there's no morality. But if there is a God, there definitely is. And who decides what the morality is? He does, right? So that's the bit we got to get to in order to make any sort of difference. Okay, so some of this stuff, the goal here is just to kind of summarize the class a little bit and some of the major things that we've covered. One, we started out the class by covering the philosophical stuff, which I know was everybody's total favorite. And the question of just simply, what is truth? Now, does the Bible ever deal with that issue? Definitely does. In fact, that exact question is asked in the Bible. Who asked it? You know? Pilate. Pilate asked it. Yeah, Pilate's the one who asked that. So this question's been around for a very long time. Jesus answers it, by the way, in John 14:6. He says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. One of the problems that we have to deal with is that people do not, we've kind of culturally moved to this idea that truth is subjective and personal. And so truth is whatever I want it to be. People talk about my truth and your truth and that sort of thing, and we have to be able to handle that. So one of the easiest ways to handle that is to simply regurgitate their argument back at them. If people say there's no such thing as truth, the question that you ask right after that is that true? Right? If there's no such thing as truth, is that true? Because they just made a true statement. Or they say, you have your truth and I have my truth. Ask them, is that truth true for me just like it is for you? Because what if you say, I know it messes with your head some, but you know, for you, you have your truth and I have my truth, but what if for me, we all have my truth? You see the confusion of it? So the easiest way to handle it, sorry, I just attacked myself. The easiest way to handle stuff like that is to just ask questions. I'm a big fan of asking questions and asking people to clarify their point of view. Sometimes the easiest question you can ask is, how did you come to that conclusion? And that will throw people a lot. Somebody says something that they read on Twitter or Reddit, and they've never thought it through at all. And you say, oh, how did you come to that conclusion? That's great. Let them exist in that moment of slight panic for a little while. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Just let them swim in it for a little bit. Another thing we covered is ideas have consequences. This is tied to the idea of philosophy, but if somebody says there's no such thing as truth, not only is that not intelligible because that's a true statement, but are there consequences to that? Just like we talked about with the worldview that everything's an accident and your whole moral purpose is to just progress your superior DNA and it's superior because it's yours. Has that had any consequences in the world? Yeah, just a couple. just a couple of, world wars. Nothing big, right? So these things, they have consequences. Ideas have consequences. And that has always been the case, that ideas have major consequences. The third one that we talked about was an easy kind of acronym to help talk about some of those puzzle pieces that you want to help use to have people consider the evidence. Is SURGE. S stands for, if anybody knows this off the top of your head, I'll be super impressed. Anybody remember what S stands for? Yeah, it's okay. Second law of thermodynamics. U stands for the universe is expanding. R stands for my new favorite rock band, Radiation Afterglow. G is galaxy seeds. And E is Einstein's theory of relativity. All of those are just kind of little bookmarks to help you remember those. We've got You've got the book so that you can refresh those if you need them for some reason. But that's a series of very clear things that science knows that lead to the idea that there is a beginning, an impetus to the universe. And everything that has a beginning has a what? Yeah, has an end, and it also has a cause, right? As a cause. Okay. 4 is anthropic constants. Anybody remember what anthropic stands for? Yeah. Yep, so those are the different constants. Anthropic constants are things like gravity, oxygen levels, these little dials. They're all dialed in a very specific way that are required. Even the amount of distance of the Earth from the sun. And we call them anthropic constants because it's required for life to exist, for human life to exist in particular. So there's a whole list of those. And that list keeps growing, but the fact of the matter is that each of those are independent variables, meaning they didn't have to be the way they are, but they are. Right? Just like if you have that big board of all the dials, you could put the dials wherever you wanted to. Right? One dial doesn't turn the other dial. They are each independent of each other. But if they're all dialed in exactly the way to make life happen, what does that tell you? That's it. Somebody did the dialing in, right? Somebody put it all together. Okay, DNA and life. One of the first things that you learn in science class, this is one of my favorite ones to use. One of the first things you learn in science class is the very first scientific method experiment ever done. And it proved that life never comes from non-life. We take this for granted. You and I understand. It takes a living thing to create another living thing. We get that. Rocks don't turn into living things. But people used to think that was exactly how it happened. They used to think maggots were generated spontaneously out of things like piles of dung. We know better now, but they did an experiment early on to prove that. Life always comes from other life. Life never comes from non-life. Well, if that is true, that life never comes from non-life, what's the question that we should always ask somebody who does not believe in God? Where did life come from? Right? Maybe you had it. Gwen's got your back. Yeah. Where did life come from? Right? Give me an answer for that. Where did it start? And along those lines, also DNA, which we know is very complicated. And DNA is a way of storing information. It's just the easy way to think of it. DNA is just information. It's the roadmap, the building blocks for life that tells your body how to make stuff. Where did the information come from? Right? So we can ask these sorts of questions and ask people to get to the bottom of them. And once again, ask the question and then be quiet. Feel free to ask the question and just wait for an answer. Let them struggle with it. Irreducible complexity. And remember the example of a man-made invention that is irreducibly complex that we used. Mousetrap. Yeah, mousetrap. Mousetrap's just got a limited amount of parts, and you take any one of those parts out, and it's not a mousetrap anymore. It requires all the parts, and they all have to be there at the exact same time. There are so many things in life that are exactly the same way. It's not like you can have one and not the other. One of my favorite ones is a giraffe, and giraffe has to have a big heart and a long neck, all at the same. A lot of other things it has to have too, but big heart, long neck. Big heart without the long neck, head explodes. Right? Long neck, small heart, passes out and dies. It needs all of those things there at the exact same time. And if it doesn't have that stuff and a whole bunch of other things, it's dead. And dead things don't evolve. Okay. 7th, catastrophism and fossils. One of the major things that is taught today is that everything has just kind of continued the way it always has, which is interesting because in 2 Peter chapter 3, what did they say the mockers would say? Anybody remember? The mockers will say regarding the judgment day, it's just always been this way. Yeah, it continues the same way it always has. That's the fancy term for that is uniformitarianism, and yet what we see in the fossil record and everything is actually catastrophes. Lots and lots of catastrophes, and which matches a biblical worldview. Eighth thing, the moral law. We've talked about this. People believe in morality. And even when somebody gets mad at you for imposing your morality, that's them being moral, right? If somebody gets mad at you for judging them, that's them feeling like your morality's wrong, which means what do they think of their own morality? It's right. So you can't get away from the moral question. We're moral creatures, so that's another way we can kind of deal with it. Even if they don't agree with your morality, they do agree that we're moral. We talked about New Testament reliability and all of the different aspects of that. The abundance of documents, how close they were to the actual events happening, the independent verification of New Testament facts, the internal consistency of the Bible, it doesn't disagree with itself, the resilience of the text, how many people have been trying to destroy the Bible? It's not the most beloved document in the world, is it? People have been trying to get rid of it for a very long time, and yet it's still here. And then the last one is the empty tomb. Historians agree that Jesus died, and they also agree the tomb is empty. You got to deal with that at some point. Okay, Romans 1:18, I'll leave you with this as we finish out the class. In Romans 1:18 and 19, there's a set of verses that we often go to talk about the scientific evidences and how God has laid them out. What I want you to pay attention to is God made it evident to them. What God has done is He's scattered throughout the universe all of these facts about Him, these puzzle pieces that prove He is. And they are evident to everybody, and they're also there for us to use as tools. So feel free to pick up that evidence that's there and use it to defend the hope that is within you. Anybody have any comments or questions or anything like that before we close down? Okay.